Hey, Toby, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
Hey, it's an absolute pleasure. Listen, I read your book and I absolutely loved your book. What a journey that it takes you on. Really different, and honest to God, I thought it was one of the best books in that field that I've actually read. I thought it was excellent. Well done.
Thank you. That's great to hear. I really tried to do something. We can get into this a bit later, but I really wanted to do something different. I felt like recently a lot of books about cocaine had really centered on the statistics, and I wanted to talk about the people, the
Yeah.
men and women at the heart of that industry. And that's the book I wanted to write. Exciting, thrilling, just like the cocaine industry itself.
Man, it was good. It was really, really good. So well done. In terms of, I suppose, what I want to ask you first of all is, if you don't mind giving a brief introduction to yourself as well, just for anyone listening.
Absolutely. So I'm a foreign correspondent, and that's what I've been doing all my life. I've worked for newspapers, television channels. Now I make documentaries. I write books. Well, I've written a book. I'm writing the second book now. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at the moment. Obviously, with the pandemic, I'm not doing so much foreign correspondence now. I live in Washington, D.C. I've been covering the story of Trump. And now, you know, with Trump over, now I'm kind of thinking what comes next. So the world is open.
The Trump saga, is it really over though?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a big question.
I bloody hope so, but anyway. But can I ask you, okay, so you're obviously, you're half British and half American. What brought you to Colombia?
So interestingly enough, I was backpacking during, in my year off, and I went to Central America. And there's these kind of, you know, backpackers are kind of lame. So there's this kind of established trail. And so I would be in Central America in these hostels, and these people would be coming out of South America. If you think about the geography, South America here, Central America here. And the last spot in South America would be Colombia. So these people would have come from Colombia, and I would meet them in places like Nicaragua. And they just told me this amazing country, phenomenal people, just stunning landscapes. I finally got there for a holiday. I spent about 3 months there, and I loved it. And I just knew I wanted to go back. But when I first arrived in the year 2000 in Colombia, it was at the height of this civil war. It was going on. And I was just starting out as a foreign correspondent. And for me, the idea of being a foreign correspondent was covering a war. So in Colombia, it felt like you had everything. It felt like you had this amazing story you could sink your teeth into, this ongoing civil war, the center of the cocaine industry. But you could also live well. You could interact with society in a way that perhaps in the Middle East, it's more difficult.
Yeah.
When you're in the Middle East, and I've covered Iraq and Syria, there is this wall between you and the people, because there's very different cultures that are, whereas, I'll just say it in plain words, in Colombia, you can live in Colombia, you could have a girlfriend or a boyfriend if that's your choice. Yeah. In Iraq, I don't know how that would work. I'm sure things do happen, but you can become more embraced by the culture in somewhere like Colombia. And so that's how I ended up. And, you know, it was this kind of phenomenal experience in learning to be a foreign correspondent.
Brilliant, brilliant. I suppose one of the things that I wasn't actually aware of, I kind of had a little bit of an idea, but I'd say a lot of people aren't aware of, that Colombia actually has an incredibly violent history. And this goes back way further than going back to the 90s when the Medellin drug cartel, or the 80s when the Medellin drug cartel was, and the Cali cartel, and that. This goes back hundreds and hundreds of years to when the Spanish actually were actually occupying Colombia. And you touched on it in your book, Kilo. You touched on it that this is a place that has never really relented from being a war zone and from having war going on, and the people just don't know times of peace. Like,
I mean, that's absolutely true. I think there's a lot of things where, here's the fascinating thing about a country like Colombia, which I find so fascinating, is that everybody's engaged in a national conversation. I mainly grew up in London. I don't remember particularly deep conversations in London. Maybe it was just maybe it was just the way I grew up. But in Colombia, anytime you sit down with a beer with strangers in the local shop. That's where they drink beers. Imagine the pub, swap that out, the corner shop. It's got a few tables. If they want, you could get into a conversation about why Colombia is so violent.
Yeah.
It's like everybody's trying to understand it. Everybody has their own reasons, their own causes in their own mind. But it does go back to this. I mean, everybody kind of agrees at least one factor is the Spanish conquest, just this absolutely brutal conquest by the Spanish of South America, Latin America, and especially in the Andean region, because there is this idea of the idea that the Spanish arrived looking for an extractive industry, which I think is very different, because if you go there, again, no one's going to minimize the atrocities that happened in North America, obviously with the mass slaughter of the native indigenous there. But the extractive industries that you saw, which was just this kind of, we're only going to be here for a short time anyway, just grab everything and run. They weren't running, but do you know what I mean? There was no kind of vision of trying to make a stable, peaceful society. It was slavery, getting the gold out, getting the diamonds. And so that's what you constructed the society on. And Colombia in particular has always been this very unequal society, with the rich controlling so much and the rest of society, the middle class, the poor, just they have to fight for the scraps. And there's a consistent use of political violence in Colombia. And that, so in fact, drug trafficking, cocaine, when it looks out, just sees the perfect soil to take root. A country that is well versed with political violence. And I'll give you one example of how the political violence can be seen there. In the 1980s, 1990s, there was this political party called La UP, the UP, the Patriotic Union. They think it was a hard left party, but they had decided to work within the system. Mm-hmm. They estimate up to 5,000 members of that political party were slaughtered. That's just one political party. And it's not a guerrilla group. It was like an open political party. Political violence has just been a legacy there. And you're right, people don't know what peace is. And when you live there, you live under this weight of violence on your neck. Everybody does. There's not one family in Colombia that won't have an utterly atrocious story of violence to share with you. Either happened to them or a very close friend, because it touches everyone.
Yeah. No, it's funny you should. It's funny you should say. I mean, in terms of Colombia and the drug trade, I suppose. Since you obviously had the Medellin drug cartel, which was spearheaded by Pablo Escobar, and then obviously the Cali cartel, and I suppose we're looking in from an outsider who hasn't spent any time in Colombia and is kind of looking at it. Where it gets kind of muddied is, I suppose, there's very muddy waters between the rebel groups, the drug cartels, the politicians. They all seemed to be kind of corrupted by cocaine. And they all seemed to, like, everything just came back to that one kind of evil substance that kind of corrupted the whole country. Is that the case?
I mean, it didn't corrupt the whole country, I would say, but I think the power of cocaine to corrupt can never be underestimated. Okay. I think it's that thing of, and this is what we kept seeing in the drug war, they would keep sending the police and the soldiers after to try and take down cocaine. Well, they would come back corrupted because cocaine has so much money. But we can't deny the phenomenal heroes that Colombia has thrown up as well. And I want the world to know the names of these heroes as much as the names of the villains, because I think you have to see the dark and the light, right? So someone like Rodrigo Lara, you know, he knew, he was the Minister of Interior, and he knew what he was doing when he decided to stand up to Pablo Escobar. He understood the risk. And he was killed for it. You know, you had these really brave presidential candidates who said, no, I won't make a deal with Pablo Escobar. In fact, I'm going to battle. If I win the presidency, I will use everything to take down Pablo Escobar, because they understood the cancer of what these
making a deal with the devil, isn't it?
Exactly. And just to have a figure like Pablo Escobar, just to leave him to one side, he's still cancerous. You know, you can't just ignore the cancer. And these men and women, they're always men in Colombia. I mean, almost always men. They are cancerous. I mean, just this malignancy exudes from them. So cocaine does have a massive role in Colombia's recent violence, but it's not the only one. Again, I would point to being a vastly unequal society. with a corruption that transcends cocaine. The corruption there is astonishing. Colombia is a country where the anti-corruption czar is arrested for being corrupt. I mean, it's just like Colombia is a country where the head of the anti-kidnapping unit in a police force will be running his own kidnapping groups.
Jesus.
I mean, the corruption is just staggering. And you meet these honest Colombians, and this is something I say in the book, and I don't know if I phrased it the best way. If you live in Switzerland, if you live in a functioning society, and you tell me I've never broken the law, well, okay, great. But that's because it may be, I don't want to assume too much, but you also live in a society where if you break the law, you think there's a good chance that you will get caught. If you are honest and don't break the law in a place like Colombia, where the chance of you getting caught are so small, that is true courage. That is true honesty. That is true dignity. Yeah. The honest, hardworking Colombians are the most honest people I've ever met in my life. Ever. These people are genuine heroes. They live in a society such corruption, but they say, no, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it.
No, that's fair play. Absolutely. I suppose one of the things that I was kind of, because I've interviewed a few people talking to them about the Mexican drug cartels, and nowadays we're obviously in 2020. I mean, it seems every time you turn on the news, it's talking about the Sinaloa cartel, Las Zetas. Obviously, in the past, over in Colombia, we've seen the Cali cartel, we've seen the Medellin cartel, but obviously the significance now, or maybe the spotlight has switched over to Mexico, but it's kind of evolved in the way the cocaine business has actually evolved, where the Colombians, and I think you kind of touch on this in the book, that the Colombians used to take on the responsibility of trafficking the cocaine over to Europe or into the United States. And then they said, hang on a second, let's take a step back here and let's let the Mexicans do that because they share the border and we'll be the wholesalers. How did that actually come about? And I suppose my follow-up question to that is, you never hear who. I mean, are the cartels now in Colombia a little bit different in the fact that they're not as in your face, say, as the Sinaloa cartel or as the Medellin cartel were?
Exactly. So, I mean, let's just take the first part of that question about the wholesale. That's absolutely correct. And it's like, I don't want to get too far in this comparison because I think it can be overdone of like the CEO making a business decision. But sure. I do think it is kind of like a corporation. They say, look, we were making money with the retail, getting it to New York. The Colombians have these circles in New York, in Miami, across the country, Texas. But it was the final part of that journey was always the hardest. The final stretch, actually getting it into the United States. That's when a lot of their shipments kept getting taken down by customs, by whatever, DEA. Yeah. So they made that decision. All right, well, we won't earn as much money, but the supply will be constant. This probably takes place, there's never a single light switch, you know, it's a process. But this takes place over the 80s, in the 90s, where they start this process of starting working with the Mexicans. To your other question, I think that's true. Now, I say this about the Colombian cartels being less in your face. I say this as someone who knows very little about Mexico. So I know about Colombia, but the culture that we would see even 2-3 years ago of Mexican drug lords giving interviews, showing their face, and it's still the big man mentality. Yeah. I'm the big man. I'm not afraid. I'm going to show. Well, a Colombian drug lord learned this 15 years ago. If your face is on the front cover of a newspaper, the clock has started. Yeah. You've got the CIA, you've got the DEA, you've got the Colombian police, the Colombian army, you've got international Interpol, international networks now just focused on you. Yeah. It's much better. Now, a new type of drug lord has emerged, and this I touch on in my book. They call them the invisible. This is a man who basically doesn't want to be the kind of out-and-out drug trafficker. Yeah. 15 years ago, I would be in a nightclub. Well, still, you can see this, but 20 years ago, you could see in a restaurant, a man would walk in and everyone would say, there's a drug trafficker. Yeah, yeah. Because they showed it off. They didn't mind. But now, these drug traffickers, they want to pretend like they're men of business. Yeah. They're international businessmen. And that's also interesting because they're trying to get out of the deal in cocaine. The deal in cocaine is this. Cocaine will give you the chance of earning all of your dreams, as much money as you can spend, all of a long line of women. And these were important things. These are not incidental. This is why men get into this world. But cocaine puts a limit on it and says, I'll give you the chance to earn all of this, but you know what? Your life's going to be short. Yeah. That's the deal in cocaine. You'll live like a king, but it's going to be short. Mm-hmm. Now, these new guys, the invisibles, they're trying to get away from that. They want all of the benefits, but they want to live forever. And that's the kind of interesting thing, this kind of cultural change that you see. So now the really big traffickers, there's one huge trafficker left in Colombia. I mean, there's more than one, sorry, I should say. But there's one called Otoniel who runs the Clan del Golfo, the Gulf Clan cartel. Okay. And that's really the most well-known cartel. And that's basically a narco militia. His men dress in uniforms, they have heavy arms. It's a kind of half in the cities, half in the countryside. They oversee production, they oversee exporting. But yeah, I think the drug trafficker I meet in my book, who I interview, who I hang out with, he's one of these, the invisibles. He likes to go around, not be looked at, you know, always dresses nice, but he just tells people, oh, I'm a businessman.
Gotcha. So with the invisibles, obviously with the likes of Pablo Escobar, what came was extreme violence and murder and slaughter of people. With the invisibles, has the violence gone away, or is the violence very much still there?
Exactly. But that's the whole thing about violence. And again, this is the difference between Mexico and Colombia. Colombians don't want to draw attention to themselves anymore. Yeah. Now that is changing this year, and that I can get into that a little bit. But recently, what they've wanted to do is they've wanted to calm the violence down, because if you have an explosion of violence, well, then the state has to react. Mm-hmm. What is most important? Cocaine just wants to be trafficked. Yeah. She doesn't want the nonsense.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, who's the big man? She doesn't care. She just wants to be produced, trafficked, and sold to the consumer. That's all cocaine wants. And so the Colombians were seeing that, and the violence was going down as cocaine production was going up.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not a one-to-one rule.
You see,
now, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I'm just thinking there. I'm just thinking out loud, right? That I suppose the difference there, if you're looking at the difference between Colombia and Mexico, would be that with Colombia's, I suppose, role in the market now, where they're very much acting, or where these cartels are very much acting as wholesalers, whereas whereas in Mexico, the reason why the violence is so high there is because people are fighting over territories, because people want, like, places like Tijuana and Juarez and places like that that are bordered on the US, and it's the routes to get it into the country. They want to control these routes, where in Colombia, that mightn't necessarily matter as much. Would that be accurate, or?
Well, no, because you're still fighting for territory in Colombia as well, because you're fighting for the routes. They have their own routes leaving the country, like to control a port, for instance. But you're also, you're controlling the territory where the cocaine is made. Okay. So there is this ongoing. Now the massacres seem to be back in Colombia. And that's to do with this peace process that occurred in 2015 between the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the government. The deal in that peace process was the guerrillas, the rebels controlled all of this territory across Colombia where the cocaine was actually made. The deal was, the FARC said to the government, we're going to lower our weapons after a half-century fight. We're going to not going to hand them in. We're going to destroy our weapons. We're going to become civilians, but you have to turn up, take over all of this territory where the cocaine is being produced. You have to impose the minimum law and order, give people a chance to do something else with their life, and then the country has a chance. The government didn't. So what happened is you had all of these zones that had an entire infrastructure and was producing cocaine suddenly without a master.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, it was a starting pistol. So all of these militias, some militias were just created out of thin air in order to start fighting for this territory. And so now what we have now is we have many massacres across the country going on. It's this horrible thing as these different groups are fighting for control across the country, often, not always, but often to control the infrastructure of cocaine.
Gotcha. So is it nearly like you're better off having a Pablo Escobar in place where I know that's a crazy,
no, I know
that's a crazy idea, but you know what I mean? Is it nearly better to have somebody who rules with the iron fist and what he say goes? Because obviously what anarchy, or the other solution brings anarchy, doesn't it?
No, and that's a really good point. And you'll hear this constantly from people who live under the control of these illegal groups. They'll say, the one thing we want is exactly one group. And this is what you would find with the FARC. Some people liked the FARC, some people loved the FARC, some people hated the FARC. But if the FARC was in your zone, you probably just wanted the FARC itself to be there. Because if there's ever any clash, you get caught in the middle. And yes, that's what they never want. And there's an old, I don't even know what to call it. There's an old dilemma that we all know about the Colombian countryside. You own a farm in the middle of nowhere. And when I say middle of nowhere, I mean nowhere. You spend 5 hours walking your neighbor. The guerrillas, they walk past and they stop by. They're going to take a break and they ask you for some water. So you deliver some water. You hand over some water. They thank you. They move on. 3 days later, the far-right death squads, their enemies, they turn up and say, we've heard you've been collaborating with the guerrillas. Oh, no. That happened. Yeah, and so that's what happens when you get caught in the middle. At the moment, take a city like Medellin. It's very safe for tourists. It's great to go there. This is not what I'm saying. But, you know, Medellin is kind of an unstable situation regarding the underworld. Why? Because in that city, there are 3 major mafias. There's the Gulf Clan cartel, there's the Office of Envigado, and there's the Bejo cartel. That's 3 cartels for one city. Now, they've avoided in recent years, I mean, in literally the last 2, 3, 4 years, whatever, an outright drug war. But, you know.
It's simmering.
Exactly. And what happens is all of these cartels have gangs. It's really interesting. So the city is divided up into gang territory. It's unofficial, but everybody knows. I would say probably every square centimeter of that city belongs to one gang or another. Yeah. And so the gangs themselves answer to the cartels. And what that means is the cartels are equally interested in what they call micro trafficking. So drug dealing, street dealing, right? The cartels will export to America, export to Europe, but they also realize there's money to be made selling to their fellow Colombians. So they'll sell, or they'll have the gangs, which are called combos. They'll have the gangs oversee the street dealing. But in turn, the gangs are expected to be the soldiers for the cartel when there's a war. And so what you'll see neighborhoods at war. And they'll go to war and it will flare up for 2 weeks. And then the cartel heads will get involved and say, no, not now. Or sometimes it will simmer and it will keep going. And people try to read the tea leaves of these gang wars. What does that mean? Sometimes it's just gang wars, 2 hotheads going at it. But sometimes it's something else. A cartel is making a move. So it's this constant trying to read and understand what people are seeing in front of them.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting. The thing I loved about Kilo was that it brought you, when you're reading it, it brought you on this journey right from the start. That, okay, like if people consume cocaine when they get it in their nightclub in London or Dublin or Madrid or New York or wherever, they get the cocaine, but they don't think about the journey that it's been on. And what I loved about this book was that it showed you where it started, and it showed you when we think of the cocaine industry, we think of Pablo Escobar, we think of El Chapo Guzman, but there's so many different people who are all like they're the top echelon of the drug trade, whereas there's other people who are the cocoa farmers in Colombia. You've got Venezuelan economic migrants that you talk about in the book, that they come over and they're doing backbreaking work all day and they're earning $17 a day or something. And then you've got women coming over selling their bodies basically in these little cocaine trading towns and that. So it's nearly like out in the countryside in Colombia, it seems like there's nearly an economy within an economy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, just drop the word nearly. It is an economy in an economy. I mean, I walked around one town called La Guabara, which is a principal hub of a region. And this old teacher, I hung out with these teachers, these old retired teachers, and they're in these tiny towns, they're the town historians. They know what's going on. And they said they thought 90% of the economy was related to cocaine. I mean, 90%. And by the way, what happens is we've seen this in these isolated towns. There was one famous example called Miramar, I believe it's called Miramar, in the jungles, and the police turned up. They eradicated all of the coca surrounding this town. There were children starving on the street because that was the one industry that town was now entirely dependent upon.
Yeah.
And so once it was ripped out, they were done. So that's what I wanted to show with this book, this entire ecosystem of from the beginning, but all of the weird and wild characters you'll meet along the way. I kind of know that people, and I think I mentioned Pablo Escobar 2-3 times in my book.
Yeah.
Anyone who's interested in that, they've heard that story. I don't need to tell that story again. But what I do want to tell you is I want to tell you what it's like to hang out with a witch. A witch who casts spells in order to help cocaine pass undetected. I wanted you to get the impression of what it's like to go out on a Friday night in a coca town, which is like the Old West, but with AK-47s. I mean, it's lawless, but it's also thrilling. It's not all grime, and it's very depressing. Cocaine, you always lose with cocaine.
Yeah.
That's the thing. She's a kind of mirage. You will always lose. But at the time, these people are having a good time. You know, I mean, it is an attractive, sexy, thrilling, exciting business. And for many people, it's the one hope to try to be someone in this life. Colombia is tremendously class-based. I mean, I come from England, which is supposedly the worst, right? We've got nothing on Colombia. Yeah. Colombia is so class-based that if you're born poor, the tragedy is you are so likely to die poor. And so for these men and women who grow up in these these slums on the outskirts of city, they've just been pushed aside, marginalized their entire life, their parents themselves. And then you get a chance to be somebody, to inspire respect, even if it's because you're working with a gun. A lot of people take that deal. Yeah. And that Colombian society needs to change. That needs to not make it so attractive for these young men and women to get into that life. But it is deeply thrilling for these people. And when I was in that coca town, you feel an energy because there's money. Money is passing around, you know. And in the end, I kind of ended up describing the cocaine trade this way. It felt like being in a casino. There's that nervous energy where everybody is earning money. Everybody, you hear everybody all around you. Everybody's earning money. Sex is everywhere, wherever you want it. But at the same time, at any moment, someone could step up and put a bullet in the back of your head. That's what life in the cocaine trade feels like.
It's this undercurrent of danger there. That like there was one story you told of a woman. I think she was a sex worker, and as an example, one of the cartels had hung her from a tree, and they left her 2-year-old baby crying underneath her, and she was swinging from the tree for 2 days with the baby crying, and nobody actually cut her down because she was put up there as a message.
Exactly.
And this is the kind of, and they do this, you see it in Mexico, you see it in Colombia, this shock value that they want it, and you see it now adopted by people like ISIS in the Middle East. Exactly. where it's okay, we're setting an example here, and we're showing you, if you fuck with us, this is what's going to happen, which is very, very scary. And I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you was, I mean, that's shocking. That's really, really shocking. And when I was reading that, I was like, oh my God. But what's the most shocking atrocity that you actually came across? And I know that's probably a fucked up question after just saying that, but
I mean, yeah, it just, while I think about that, I think just to further that thought, I think what you have to understand, and it's interesting that you draw that thing of ISIS, because that's very true as well. It's when people are just in the midst of a hurricane of violence, when just the simple act of killing somebody no longer shocks. That's why you see this theater of the grotesque murders.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to get someone's attention.
Yeah.
In the middle of Syria, in the middle of like parts of Colombia, in the middle of parts of Mexico, just to kill someone, so what?
Yeah, it's only a bullet and it's just another body.
Exactly. Oh, but now you've done something with the head and the chainsaw and stuff. And that goes back again. These were things that we saw in one of Colombia's civil wars that's simply called the violence, which starts in 1948. So there's no drugs involved. They were already doing this. I think legend has it that's where the famous Colombian necktie. You know what that is? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where
What is it?
that was.
Where they slit your throat and pull your tongue out or something, isn't it?
Exactly. I think the idea is they slit your throat. I've never actually seen it, but I'm just going off.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going off what I understand. It's to cut your throat and you pull the neck out like that. I mean, it's just, but again, you're in a blood madness, right? You've just got to make an image. In terms of the worst things, I mean, you hear these. I mean, there was one that was just very, very disturbing, but it wasn't actually even from the cartels. It was this very disturbing story. And this kind of, again, if there's any constant villain in my book, I think it's this just useless oligarchy that has run that country, especially Colombia. And this applies across a lot of Latin America. You've got so many good, hardworking, decent people trying their best, but they're just condemned by this leadership that is just miserable.
And it's just
corruption, but they just won't share anything, and it's just awful. And so what you have is, you would have something in Bogota. You would have a open air drug market, and it was called the Bronx. This is 6 blocks from the presidential palace, and it would be like 3 square blocks. But the police never went in there unless it was a major operation. Then they went in like an invading army. I mean, literally, but a policeman would never wander in. It was so stratified, this relationship they had with between the people who ran this area called the Bronx and the police. They would leave all of the dead bodies on the outskirts of this zone every Wednesday for the police to pick them up, if they weren't putting them in vats of acid. But this man who would live there, and then they finally destroyed it. It took them way too long, but they finally destroyed it. And he told me this story. I don't, and he said that he had, this is deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. We're going for this, right?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
All right. I mean, it's really horrific. And he said that he was a drug addict, and he lived in this open air drug market. And that's what he would do. He would rob people. And then he would never leave about 3-block radius of the open air drug market, right?
Yeah.
And he would rob people every single day. He would mug them, run back in. The police would never chase him in. And that's how he would maintain his addiction to something called bazuco, which is their version of crack. Just call it crack, just to make it easy, right? So he was spending, probably, lots of money every day, maybe $100 a day on this thing. And he told me he developed a relationship with a girl who sold, I think he said she was a street seller, so she sold like ice creams, I think she said. Right. And he developed this relationship. And he said that one day she would never go in there, but she would meet him on the edge of the thing. One day he owed some money to someone. He had smoked some drugs and he hadn't been able to pay for it. And his girlfriend came, as it always, stood on the outskirts. For some reason, she came in that day. And he said that in front of her, the men he owed money to started dragging her into a house in front of him, and they beat him unconscious. And this is what he told me, and he was crying at this point. And he said he woke up and he saw that there was a line of men waiting outside this house that his girlfriend had been dragged into. And he said that he was held. Again, this is a drug addict you're talking to. So, and he said he was held for like 2 days or something. And she was raped to death. That was his girlfriend. And he said that he never stopped blaming himself. Again, this is, I don't know. I never verified the story. Why would he tell me it? But the cruelty of once you get to that, once you get really close to the dark heart of this, the cruelty is absolutely just, I mean, it's very, very dark, because
it seems like that where they go for this, it's nearly like a one-upsmanship on, okay, they cut this guy's head off with a chainsaw, watch what we're going to do. You watch what we're going to do. And it's a one-upsmanship to a new evil. And like, I've seen some of the videos online, and some of these videos, like you see the ISIS videos, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to shock and whatever, but some video, like sometimes there's new scenarios and it just gets more and more evil, and like
Yeah.
you describing that there, I mean, what everyone's probably listening is the first thing you do is you think of your own loved ones and you think of your own
Mhm.
people, and you just think about, you put yourself in that situation and try and empathize, and that's hell.
No, truly hellish. I mean, I just won't, on a point of principle, watch those videos. I mean, I never have, and I never will.
No,
I
you're
don't think
right.
anything good comes out of
You're
that.
right. You're right.
You really, and as someone who has to deal with this for my job, there are things that I think I would urge people who have the choice. There are you're not enriched by that. You are not.
No.
I think, and I actually touch on this in my book as well. To know that level of evil is out there, I don't know if it makes you a better person. If that's, yeah, I don't think it makes you wiser. I don't think
No.
it improves you in any way. I think it only drags you down. I think, yeah.
So it's funny you should say that, because I remember the first time I saw one of those videos, and I was actually over in London, and I was out with some Irish buddies of mine, and somebody actually put up, it was one of the Mexican ones, and somebody put the video in front of me. It was about maybe 11:30 or 12 at night. I was in a bar, I was in good spirits. That fucking ruined my night. Honestly, that ruined my night, because
because you, because you're normal, because you're a human being, you're capable of understanding someone else's pain. I worry about the people who really think this is really funny, who don't see, I just the way that people who torture cats and dogs, you're not right in the head, you know.
no, man.
And if you really are watching these videos every week, I would urge you, and I say this in all seriousness, if you are regularly watching those videos, get in touch with someone and speak to someone.
Yeah,
But
you know
I
what?
mean this, and I don't mean to shame anybody for their preferences, but you want to keep hold of that. That is not a great sign, you
No,
know?
no. Agreed. Uh, I suppose something else I wanted to ask you about, and it's something that I'm curious about, and it's something that I'm sure a lot of other people are curious about, things like this. So say, okay, so obviously it started out where I touched on it there a few minutes ago, where the Colombians were directly bringing the cocaine, and to a certain extent they still do that, but it's more the Mexicans now have to have the easier routes going into the US and going over to Europe and that. But in terms of what's the relationship between the Colombian cartels and the Mexican cartels, and I suppose a subset of that question would be, are there, let's say, a certain cartel in Colombia would be aligned with a certain cartel in Mexico, and which would make them not do business with other cartels and be enemies with other cartels in Mexico? Do you understand?
Absolutely, yeah. No, and it's a very good question. And I'll preface it, well, let's answer the second question. Will Colombian drug traffickers ally with Mexican drug traffickers? Absolutely. And there can be deals where that will then make them exclusive. So just to set that to one side. Now, what's the relationship between the Mexican cartels and the Colombian cocaine producers and the Colombian cartels, let's call them? That is a controversial question. That's not an easy answer. And I'll give you the different answers. There are some people who now portray this, that the Mexican cartels are turning up to Colombia and they're taking over these zones. And so there are reports of various different parts, for instance, places I go to in the book, Catatumbo, which actually in the old indigenous means the land of lightning, because there are more lightning strikes there than any part in the world.
Yeah.
Next to the border with Venezuela, there's reports of many, many Mexicans there. Another place called Tumaco, which is on the Pacific coast, a small fishing village, which has been the site of a lot of violence, but it's also this important exit point for the drugs. There's reports of Mexicans there. So that's one version, that the Mexicans have turned up, now they're giving the orders. And I'll tell you why I don't believe that's true. Because if you looked at Colombia, the fight of Colombia for 500, 600 years, whatever, since the Spanish arrived, has been to control the land. That's what they're always fighting about, whether it be conservative versus liberal, whether it be guerrillas versus far-right death squads, whether it be rival narco militias. So what I say is I paint this picture. You turn up, you fly in from Mexico with 20 of your guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to go to a violent part of the country and you're going to say, hey guys, I'm new here, I'm the boss.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, is it?
And then so I say, no, you're not, and I kill all of you. Now what happens is back in Mexico, 20 more guys need to get on a plane, they need to fly into Bogota, then fly into Catatumbo, hire a van, drive up, say, we're here to take revenge, I kill you again.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't work that way. I just don't believe it. What I do believe, if you're going to tell me that Mexican cartels are sending emissaries to overcheck supplies and a businessman's agreement, yes, that's right, 5 tons are here. Yeah, I believe that. And are they turning up? Are they giving more money to these narco militias and saying, hey, look, here's some more money for you to buy more arms, to take more territory off that group, and we'll buy all of the cocaine? Absolutely. I just don't believe this picture of the Mexicans turning up, right, there's a new boss in town, because it just doesn't work that way. No one can move.
So I suppose I'm probably going all Hollywood here on you, but in terms of yeah, I suppose that was kind of my follow-up question in terms of like, so you don't think that there's an actual conflict, or that there's conflicts between, because some people would say, right, the lucrative part, and you touched on this in your book, the lucrative part of the cocaine trade is, okay, getting that over into the United States or getting that into Europe, and that's where it goes boom. It's you make a lot of money doing that. So why would the Colombians just give that up to the Mexicans? I know, okay, there's geographical reasons and whatever, but why would they do that when they can say, hang on a second, we can also smuggle it in there and whatever? So why would they give it to them?
Because, okay, now, yeah, and just to give, I can give you some numbers to even reinforce what you were saying about the difference. You can buy a kilo of cocaine in Colombia with the right contacts for, like, this is business price, roughly what, $1,500, $1,600. Get that kilo to Mexico, it's $10,000. Get that kilo to Miami, it's $25,000. Oh, wow. Get that kilo to New York, it's $40,000. Now, if you want to keep going, now this is going to blow your mind. Get that kilo. Now, this is retail, but get that kilo.
Australia or New Zealand or somewhere.
New Zealand.
Yeah,
New Zealand.
It's like what is it? It's like $230 or $240 a gram in New Zealand, isn't it?
$240,000 for 1 kilo.
Fucking yeah.
And it started off as 1,600.
1 gram, yeah.
That's so anyway, so that's just to give you the idea of, but again, if you look at things like coffee, if you look at things like a lot of these other commodities, that's often the way. You know, it's once it's been processed and goes along. Take the coffee bean in Colombia. The coffee farmers are not making a fortune. The guy who owns Starbucks makes a fortune. So this is normal. But going back to the thing about why did the Colombians give up the retail? Because it was a business decision. They can't use Mexico without paying extortionately from the Mexicans.
Or without getting killed in Mexico themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. You turn up to Mexico, hey, I'm Colombian, now I'm in charge. It doesn't work that way. We know that the Mexicans did at one point force the Colombians to pay in kind for helping to get the Colombians' product across.
Okay.
And also, the final thing is, the Colombians, you know, they just, it's hard to keep track of what's going on in New York, what's going in Miami if you live in Medellin. I mean, it's possible, but just sell it to the Mexicans. Let them take care of it. Yeah. You've just done a single transaction. You've got your 5 tons of cocaine in a semi-sub, the submarines. You send it from the Pacific coast. It spends 5 days. It reaches the Mexican-Guatemalan border. They receive it. You receive what 5 tons would be. What would that be? That would be 10,000 a kilo. 1,000 times 10,000. What is that?
My maths is not good.
I know. We're going to make a fool of ourselves. But I'm going to do it now because now I've just thought I can't not give your viewers.
People will be like, those guys can't add up.
Exactly. No. All right. So that's 1,000. Right. So 10 million per ton and you've just done 5, that's $50 million.
Yeah, so it's still
And
massive money.
exactly, and that's just
With way less risk as well, because you're not having to deal with the US. Like, obviously the big risk comes in getting it into the US, because the US are I mean, their borders are heavily guarded, but it's not to say it doesn't get in. And but I think the other strategic thing is, obviously, because of Mexico's proximity to the United States and the amount of people. Okay, like, there's a lot of Colombians in the United States, but compared to Mexicans, like, the Mexicans, they've got the foot soldiers on the ground, they've got the street gangs there, and they can go and they can move it around. So they've got the whole infrastructure ready made for selling drugs over in the US.
And there's a fantastic book, a really great book. I would highly urge you to read it. It's called Meth Land.
Okay.
And it details that. It's probably about 10 years old when meth was a huge thing. And it's such a good book. And he goes back, and it's this man, and he goes back, he's from somewhere like, I think, Idaho. And he's just one of those towns that were ravaged by meth. But he talks about that. He talks about how you have these large Mexican communities spotted across the country where the traffickers just swim like fish. And they're just, and again, that's what drug trafficking always needs. It needs legal, innocent, law-abiding civilians in order to camouflage themselves. So the pandemic hit drug traffickers kind of hard, because let's take the Eastern Pacific, right? This is the biggest cocaine corridor on the planet, the Eastern Pacific Ocean. South America's here, Central America's there. The boats go from here to there. Here's the United States. These boats, the fishing boats that had 5 tons of cocaine, well, they needed other fishing boats and normal commerce going up through this zone in order to hide amongst. Once you took away all legal shipping, then the one boat going was obviously had cocaine. Right? Commerce was shut down. So, and take that, what we just talked about, the Mexican community. So you have these Mexican migrant communities, hardworking people turning up to places like Chicago who are doing an honest job, trying to get by. Well, the traffickers, the dealers, will move amongst them. You know, they don't stand out. And that's why, exactly as you say, and there's these Mexican communities throughout the country, they can depend upon that a lot more than Colombians can.
Exactly. But even in Mexico, I mean, I've seen a lot of documentaries, and I've seen a lot of things on the border where, let's say, for instance, let's say you live in Tijuana, yeah? And let's say you're working in San Diego and you travel across the border every single day. And let's say you're clean and you're not a criminal, you're in no way involved with any cartels, but they're watching you and they know you're working there. So what they actually do, and you're going to work one day, they've planted a load of cocaine or a load of meth or cannabis or whatever, and probably not cannabis anymore because it's legal, but they plant all that in your car. You jump into your car, Toby jumps in, he drives across the border thinking, hey, I'm just going to work. And then, hey, presto, Toby gets done for fucking smuggling 10 kilos of cocaine across the border. And there's no risk there, bar losing the thing. And they just break into your car and take it then.
But you just did give the risk, though, losing the merchandise.
Losing but that's always there, though, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely. But it is a big hit for them. But I think that's also, you've just explained why. Imagine you're a Colombian. God, you're going to be dealing with 1 kilo crossing? No, you know, it's just that idea of just, we're done. I've made my money. I don't have to fiddle around with the little kilo here, little 5. And to give you, and just following up on that, by the way, the way it can be so funny, where the way people view things. I was with the US Coast Guard for 2-3 weeks. They are disappointed if they take down anything less than 500 kilos. Like anything less than that, for them is just like, oh God, why did I get out of bed? I mean, they don't say that, but you know what I mean.
So how frequently, so you spent time with them, how frequently would they be hitting on these big loads?
I mean, that's in those chapters, that when I went out with them, they picked me up in a place called Puerto, God, I'm going to kill myself now. It was a small Costa Rican port. They picked me up there. They were on like 2 days of R&R, and it's just, they get off, they have a few beers, they get back on, they reload supplies. We were 12 hours out of dock. They found their first boat with cocaine. 12 hours. They went back onto sea. I mean, they picked up drugs there. They picked up drugs the next day. 2 days later, they pick up 5 tons or 4 tons. Another day they pick up 2.5 tons.
Oh my
I'm
God.
thinking, my God, how much cocaine is out there? But interestingly, then it stopped and it all dried up. And you get this feeling on the boat that everyone's kind of in a pissy mood because they're out there. It's a 3-month mission they're on, circling the Eastern Pacific. But then the cocaine dries up and they get kind of antsy because that's why they're out there. They want to be taking down the big scores. But that's the biggest cocaine corridor on the planet.
Yeah. That's it's mind-boggling. But I mean, it just goes to show the amount of narcotics being moved all the time, and like people.
We're in the golden age of cocaine.
Yeah.
There's never been more cocaine than ever before.
Yeah. And well, listen, I mean, even in terms of if I go out to a bar, I mean, we're obviously in the middle of COVID, but even now, if I go out to a bar, there's heavy restrictions in Dublin at the moment. So let's say if I went out to a bar and I'm in there on a Saturday night, I guarantee you, I'll go into the bathroom and you'll hear that. You're just hearing it constantly. It's constantly. And I mean, this is in Ireland where I know I've had friends coming over from the US and people are like, geez, I didn't think as many, it would be that big over here and stuff. Whereas it's rampant over here. It's rampant everywhere. It's rampant everywhere.
Is your feeling in, where are you, Dublin?
I'm in Dublin, yeah.
Is your feeling that there's never been more of the drug, cocaine in particular, than there is right now?
Without a shadow of a doubt, Toby.
How much roughly is a gram?
Depending on the quality, it would range from, I suppose, from 80 to 100 euros.
Jesus, 80 euros.
Yeah.
But that's money.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that in pounds? Because in my feeling in London, I just always have the figure of £50, but I haven't lived in London for so long.
80 euros, I'd imagine, would be maybe 68 pounds, I'd imagine. Yeah.
That much. Because I would imagine, I mean, what I understand is in Europe.
It depends on the quality though, as well.
Sure.
I mean, like it's obviously going to vary, and it's going to vary as well over in the UK, where obviously if you're buying whatever, the quality is going to vary, and you can buy obviously different grades, I'm sure, and whatever, you know.
No, of course. No, I can imagine that. I mean, what's your feeling? Is your feeling that it comes, because my understanding would probably be, again, that most of the drugs, arrive in Rotterdam and then are kind of spread out across? Or do you think there's direct, I know there have been direct links from Ireland straight to South America.
Okay, which is actually a good point, because, so there was an Irishman who was murdered quite gruesomely by one of the cartels in Colombia, where he was strangled in bubble wrap and basically thrown into a river. This was about 3 or 4 years ago.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, and okay, so he was sent over there allegedly. He was sent over there to smooth things out for quite a very substantial Irish drug cartel. And he was apparently they owed their suppliers a few $1 million. He went over to smooth things out. It didn't go very smoothly for him by the looks of things, and he was murdered over there. So I know that, I mean, there is very large Irish criminals in the drug trade, and I know that they do have direct connections to Colombian cartels. So I'd imagine, now obviously with the, I suppose, the crime scene in Europe, a lot of these criminal gangs, say between Ireland and say the Netherlands, these guys would be working together, and then you might have gangs in Liverpool, and the Liverpool gangs and the Irish gangs might be working hand in hand, and they might be bringing in loads together, and it might come in through the Netherlands, or it might come in through whatever port. It could come in through any port, and then it's obviously distributed. Then Spain as well is obviously a massive one, because I mean, one of the things I was talking to somebody about recently, I'm trying to think who it was that I spoke to about this. It might have been Johan Grillo, where I was talking about where one of the African countries, I can't remember the name of the African country, but it's actually a narco state. What is it? Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually a narco state now. So that's basically run by, I think it's the Colombians, where basically drugs are going in there, and then they're getting it across to Spain through Morocco. Like,
apparently, like, you drive through and like someone will say, a huge mansion. They'll say, "Oh yeah, a Colombian lives there." So,
Fucking hell, that's crazy.
just the Colombians, you know, just wandering around, you know. So that's really interesting. I think again, it goes back to this thing about criminals looking for disguise. And what I mean is, 15 years ago, when you were a foreigner and you turned up to certain regions, well, you stood out. But now with so much tourism, I think these criminals from across the world are flying in and they're trying to arrange they're saying, why do I need the middleman, right? But as you said, these guys quickly figure out that, like, if you go over, if there is a debt to be paid, I mean, it's stating the obvious, but that is something in Colombia that is not a minor thing.
Fuck around with that.
Do not fuck around on a debt, because then because the feeling is, and I know I'm stating the obvious, if he doesn't pay me, no one else is ever going to pay me.
You've got to set an example.
Exactly. And there was another story of a lot of the region I was in. So this area, Catatumbo, right? You have to fly into a city called Cucuta, which is right on the border with Venezuela. And it takes you about 5 hours to get to where I was, roughly, right? And this is a well-known zone where they produce cocaine. So some Canadian dude, this was probably about a year and a half ago or something, obviously had the bright idea of he was going to go to Catatumbo and start making his own deals, right? Yeah. He got something like 5 miles outside of Canadian criminal, by the way, I should say, because it's the punchline is going to be, he gets 5 miles outside the city before he's found dead. You know, I mean, he obviously had got into something and was like, hey, and you know, everyone wants to be a Tony Montana. All of these guys, and they think, hey, now I'm Tony Montana. You are in the land of people not fucking around. So.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, and one of the things you actually said in your book as well was, I believe, if my memory serves me correct, I think it was the Italian mafia. I assume you meant the Italian mafia from actual Italy, and they had been fucked over by one of the Colombian crime groups, and they'd been robbed of, I think it was 3 million euros or dollars or whatever. And basically, the Italian mafia, they're fucking big in Italy, but you go to Colombia, like what we're saying about the Mexican drug cartels, they're not going to be able to do anything over in there. So they have to, if they've got a relationship with one of the cartels there, they need them to sort that out, or else that damages that relationship, you know?
Exactly. And that's what, I mean, this is the drug trafficker who I follow and who I got to know quite well. This is, without giving away, he gets into trouble at one point, and one of the rumors is that he had stiffed over some Italians, as you say, to the
that was Alex, right?
Exactly, Alex. And the Italians, what I understand in this rumor, went to another drug trafficker who I don't mention in the book and complained, and that could have been the reason for what happened. But again, you'll have to buy the book.
Buy the book. Absolutely. It's a good story. Moving on to one of the things, one of the chapters. You spend time talking to sicarios or assassins, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, and what's it like sitting down with these guys or being in the presence of these guys? And I suppose something that I was kind of thinking in my head and that I looked up on Google when I was reading this was to give context of how fucked up this is, right? Ted Bundy, who is a world notorious serial killer and is known the world over for the crimes he committed, killed 30 women. Some of these sicarios are saying that they've killed thousands of people. That is crazy.
There was one guy in the far-right death squad who I think went by the name El Iguano.
El Iguano, that was it, yeah.
He claimed to have been responsible for killing 1,500, 2,000 people. I mean, it's just, at that stage, it's just, the mind can't compute. And as you say, I mean, you know, let alone Ted Bundy, Jack the Ripper was like, what, 5 or 6 people? I mean, when you sit down, I'll tell you, it's interesting because I've met people who, by the end, I thought, okay, this is a psychopath. So there was one person who's not actually in the book. His name was Francisco Villalba, who was another far-right death squad. I got to know him quite well. He was in prison. He had overseen a number of massacres, really brutal, horrible massacres where they'd skinned people alive. He, I realized, was a psychopath. The the contract killer in the book is not a psychopath. It's actually, it's more worrying, because a psychopath, I would say, I'm not an expert on this, but it's someone who's born broken at birth, right?
Yeah, there's a defect within their brain or something where, yeah.
Effective, exactly. You know, and just as if it's just someone who is just wrong. They're just born wrong, right? These sicarios are actually made by a society that's indifferent to violence and that doesn't give people a chance to get ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It creates this profession of a sicario. And, you know, a kind of funny thing, not a funny thing, but a thing you keep hearing from these people is the first time they carry out their killings, they're always teenagers and they always vomit. And it's this really interesting thing. And it just shows that they're overcoming because they're not born bad. You know, that's the tragedy. They actually know they're doing something awful, but they're being pressured by elder people to get into this game. And that's a game where you become a sicario, you are living life at 200 miles an hour because you are not going to reach an old age.
No, that's the thing. I think with something like that, and it's this, I think you can relate this to society as well, where it's something like, I'll give you an example, okay? There was a drugs murder or a drug-related murder in a town maybe an hour outside of Dublin in Ireland. And it was to do with some pretty high-profile criminals, and there was a young teen or a teenager who was 17. Yes.
Yeah.
So he was chopped up. He was chopped up into pieces, and it was gruesome. There was videos again, like we spoke about. There was videos going around again. This kind of shock thing that whatever. But then I know one of the things you went through in the book, and it struck me, and it kind of hit a chord with me, was when you were going through the death notices, or you were just giving an example of, okay, this happened in a given week, and you're just going through listing things. And you'd mentioned that there was 2 instances of where people had been chopped up within a month. But these people are like, Colombian society are probably numb to that. And it's like a sicario would be numb to, once you kill 10 people, what's killing 100 people?
No, I agree. And there's also something else weird that and this is something unique that took me years to understand. So imagine, we still use the word broadsheets, right?
Yeah.
For the big papers, like in England, the Guardian, the Times.
Sure.
So you've got broadsheets in Colombia, and you've got the tabloids. But the tabloids in Colombia are fascinating. I wish I had an example to show you. These tabloids will always have, on the front cover, the most lurid photo, close-up photo of a murder victim from the previous day. That's the front cover, the blood and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And the first pages will be all of the murders of the day before. And that's what the tabloid is. And it's these tabloids that mix, and on the back page, it will be their version of page 3, a woman in lingerie. I don't know if they'll let her be topless.
So it's the murder sells, basically, is that?
Exactly, but murder sells, and then the sex. So it's basically, and it's football. It's basically murder, sex, and football. And that's what the tabloid's there. But gruesome photos. I mean, genuinely gruesome.
And that's strange that they're actually allowed to show us over there on the media, because, you know, like in the United States or in the UK or Ireland, people like you'd never see something like that shown.
Exactly. And certainly in the US, it's because of convention rather than any law. In England, I bet there are laws, because there's laws for everything in England, right? But it's amazing. And so you would go into this, the equivalent of a newsagent, like these stalls, kiosks, and there would be like 5. I mean, now, obviously, because of the internet, there's less papers. But when I first got there, there would be 5 different tabloids, and there would be 5 different graphic murder photos and huge photos in lurid Technicolor. But what's interesting is, in the broadsheets, in the proper newspapers, so the things called El Tiempo, El Colombiano, El País, these are the big normal newspapers, they stopped reporting on murders unless they were very high profile.
Yeah.
So that meant that the Colombian middle class and upper class who read the broadsheets, they weren't even bothering to pay attention to the murders. Yeah. So you would actually find these doctors and lawyers who I would meet them in these parties in Bogota. They'd say, oh, well, you know, the violence is in the past. You would go to a poor neighborhood, they'd say, fuck no, is it? Because they're the ones dying. Yeah. So the Colombian rich are deluding themselves because murder came to seem bad taste. It was vulgar.
Yeah.
They don't want to be bothered anymore about it. And it shows about how the rich just turn their back on how the poor are suffering. And the final thing is that just, again, I really want people to understand how funny Colombians can be. They have such a great sense of humor. It's dark as fuck, but it's so funny. So Colombia, as I said, is very old-fashioned. Like they've got the social pages. You couldn't get away with this in England now. But the social pages, there will be like the daughter of so-and-so attended her coming out party. You know, stuff like this, like old-style social things. Now, there's an old joke that, so the social pages for the rich, they would call the crime pages of the tabloids the social pages of the poor. That's where the poor people, if you're poor, that's where you end up, right? They're so funny, but there's an anger in their humor that I really dig. You know, I really appreciate that humor, that they just can take life and just make a joke out of it, but a really stinging satire at the same time. Colombian humor is the best.
It's for sure. Toby, you've been very generous with your time. I've got 2 more questions, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay. First one, I actually want you to tell a story. It's only a small story, but it's something that blew me over when I was reading your book. And it was only a story you kind of glossed over, but it was a story that I found very powerful in kind of summing up the corruption and the greed and the betrayal that cocaine can cause. And it was when the man was coming through the airport holding the lollies. Can you tell that story?
I will. So I wasn't there. I was there with the police officers, and everybody's obsessed. Everybody's got their own favorite stories of the drug war. So you hang out with the police, they all want to share it. Give them a couple of cups of coffee. And this policeman tells this story that I'll try and get it right. So he's working the checkpoint. A man walks through and he's got a bag of lollipops in his bag. And they're just doing a random check, and he's with his daughter and his wife. And they stop him and they're just going to do a random check, and they start checking this bag of lollipops. And the policeman said immediately, he noticed out the corner of his eye, the wife and the mother immediately start acting suspicious. They're tense. The man, nothing. He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, look in there. Yeah, it's fine. They break one of them open. Inside the lollipop is cocaine.
Yeah.
The man starts shouting and screaming, this is wrong, this can't be true, this is nothing to do with this, I'm a law-abiding man. And he turns to his wife and he says, tell them where we bought them. Let's just get over with this. The police need to know who's selling this cocaine. And the wife says nothing. And the man just looks at his wife, and he's taken away. And the man even says, look, you gave them to me. Just tell them, where did you buy them? And the policeman said that that man ended up probably going to prison, but he knew that man had unwittingly carried that cocaine through.
He'd been betrayed by his wife and child.
Basically reconstructing it, that just as they approached the checkpoint in the airport, the wife had said, hey, could you just carry this bag of candy for me? This bag of lollipops.
That is disgusting.
And the policeman ends this by saying, I went home that night and I looked at my wife real hard.
Fuck yeah, man. Absolutely. You're like, what?
Exactly. You can't trust anybody in that world when there's thousands of dollars. And, when you buy your ticket, man, that's the thing about, that's the other message I'd love people to understand about this. Everybody in this book I interviewed, from the top drug trafficker, his girlfriend, the killer for hire, everybody expresses some sort of regret. Yeah. They bought their ticket and it was too late. They realized it was one way, far too late. They kept on telling themselves, I can still back out. I can still back out. And then they realized that the door has slammed shut. There's no backing out. You're in.
Cocaine is a drug with no happy endings.
There really isn't.
There's no happy endings.
No one gets out of it. The only one, everybody just becomes a slave to cocaine.
Yeah.
And she just keeps being trafficked.
User or supplier or whatever, there is no happy ending with cocaine.
She uses you. That's the point. Everybody thinks they're using cocaine to get what they want. She's using you to get her trafficked. Yeah. That's always the way it is.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, last question, and I suppose, so I've asked Johan Grillo this, I've asked guys from Homeland Security, from the FBI, the war on drugs, it's lost, okay? I think everyone knows that. What's the answer in terms of, from your opinion, what is the answer moving forward? Is there a way where, I mean, there's an argument, do you legalize? Do you legalize cocaine? Do you legalize other drugs? Do the cartels even want it legalized because they're making so much money now? They're probably happy as a pig in shit with the way things are.
In my again, in the book, this is a conversation I have with Alex, the drug trafficker, because he's looking at, this was a few years ago, he was looking at what was happening with marijuana, about the legalization in different parts of the United States, if not decriminalization. And he got angry about the whole idea of legalizing drugs, because that will take away all of even men who want high risk for high reward.
Yeah.
If you take away the risk, the reward goes down. You know, I mean, this is what they're in. So they don't want the drugs legalized. The last thing, the two people who are absolutely going to be the last people on earth who want drugs to be legalized are the DEA and the drug traffickers.
Yeah.
We're caught in the middle. We're caught
in the business.
Yeah, they're both out of business.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but there are entire parts of the national security world in Ireland, England, the UK, America, who depend upon drugs being illegal.
And it's employment, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. There are pensions. And there's old jokes, not jokes, but there's old things like, I think there was a case when California, years and years and years ago, wanted to, the first step when it was on its own trying to legalize marijuana, one of the major people to put money fighting that campaign was the prison workers union.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have prisoners, they lose jobs.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want prisoners anymore. You know, I don't want to live in the middle of this drug war anymore. But I mean, so what happens next? I think probably philosophically, I'll say, I probably lean towards the idea of, you don't have the right to tell me what I put in my body. I don't have the right to tell you what you have. Because we're not winning on the demand. Do you know of any successful plan where you are, where I am, to lower demand? No, we don't know how to. We don't even have the vocabulary. And I would say something else that I really do want to get across more. We have to stop being childish about talking about drug use as well. The vast majority of people use cocaine with no profit.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. It's not the end of the world just to admit that. Some people have absolutely horrific experiences.
Same as with alcohol.
Exactly. Same with instant heart attacks.
Same with eating. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So I don't want to minimize it, because there are genuine risks, and people can, you know, there have been successful athletes who just died of a heart attack the first night of ever taking cocaine. There are real risks. The risk of addiction when you're out on the street, because, you know, there are real risks. But we have to be mature enough just to say the vast majority use it and they move on with their lives. But I will say this about those people who want to legalize all of the drugs. It took the marijuana advocates decades to get to this point. They were fighting when they were lonely voices in the wilderness. They were punchlines. I remember this in the 80s. Marijuana advocates, oh, those hippies, crazy hippies. They'll never get what they want. And they had grassroots movements. They had famous celebrities who would come out and say, like in America, the famous one is the country and western singer Willie Nelson, would come out and say, you know, I like marijuana. He was a joke for a while though, because popular culture couldn't handle it. And oh, the druggie. I don't see where that famous celebrity, where those grassroots movements are advocating for the legalization, or at least the decriminalization of heroin and cocaine. And I have another thing is, it's like the uncle or auntie reaction. Turn around, speak to your uncle or auntie and say, I believe heroin and cocaine ought to be available at the corner store. Yeah. Rightly or wrongly, their mouth's going to drop open and think you're a lunatic. Yeah. Now, I will say one other thing, though. Things seem to be moving very fast, though. We just had, I think it's up in one of those Pacific Northwest states, they have just announced that they are decriminalizing all drugs.
Really?
Which is big. I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens there.
Yeah, because Toby, what I find quite interesting, and in fairness to the US, it's been quite progressive with this. With you're seeing states like a lot of states now, California, Denver, or whatever, where marijuana has been legalized, and obviously you've got Amsterdam in Europe, and like I'm kind of interested to see when even, and like I don't even smoke weed, but when things like weed are going to be, when this conversation is going to be taken more seriously in places like the UK and Ireland, because I mean, for me, you've got this old-fashioned attitude of people kind of saying, oh, well, no, and whatever. But like, where's the destruction versus some, like, look at marijuana versus alcohol. Tell me where the destruction is, and tell me the guy who goes smoking a load of weed and goes home and beats the fuck out of his wife and kills her. You know what I mean? That stuff doesn't happen.
No, and I agree. I mean, I will say that I do think heavy marijuana use does have consequences. But again,
heavy anything has consequences.
Absolutely.
You know?
But I do want to just be clear that
of course. Yeah.
I've noticed people who smoke every day, they're much slower. They just are. They're slower in everything. And that's fine. But that's what I mean. It's not my decision. Sure. They know the real. They've decided that they want to live that life, that they prefer to be a bit slower, take things at a different pace. But there are consequences. So I do want to be kind of, I just don't want to be like, hey, marijuana, yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But it's as you say, look, if you're going to down half a bottle of whiskey every day, there's going to be a consequence to that as well.
Because it's funny because, like, okay, you've got quite well-known advocates, like people like Joe Rogan. You've got people like Mike Tyson, who was fighting there last week, who, like, these guys are saying that they can't really function without doing it, and this really helps bring them to another level. So I think it's different thing. You see, here's the thing. I think they try and come up with one rule for everyone, and we're human beings. Human beings are so fucking complex, you know?
Exactly. And you know yourself better than I do, and that's what I was going back to. So you know what works for you. I know what works for me. Exactly, and that's why I do believe that, heroin, I do believe they ought to basically, if not be legalized, then at least decriminalized. That,
stop making criminals of people who have problems as well, and let them, like, if you are an addict, well, then stop treating people like a criminal and put them in jail where they go in this perpetuating cycle and then whatever. Let's help these people.
And even when it was marijuana, I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, the idea that it was a smart idea to criminalize this herb, this kind of plant, and send your children to the most roughest parts of the city in order to go buy it. It's just kind of crazy. Like, why are you pushing your children into the arms of violent drug dealers in super sketchy parts of Washington?
You are predators.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you're pushing your, like, oh, good job. Go push your 14-year-old daughter to go hang out. Like, good job. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Yeah. Or instead, you could not push your daughter into the arms of a fucking full-time drug dealer. I mean, maybe don't do that. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just...
No, man, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Exactly. So why did we push our children, or why did they push their children into the arms of the underworld? Never made sense to me. So it's a libertarian aspect. You know what you're doing. I have my own point of view about all of this. Cocaine, it's also curious about the way society decides to treat this. And what I mean by that is, if you take gin today, you know where I'm going with this. Gin today is seen as a very kind of, the Queen Mother, right? The Queen Mother gin and tonic. What is it? 250 years ago, there was Gin Alley. Gin Alley was their version of crack cocaine at the time. So it's the way we decide to treat these things. And again, you mentioned the idea of Amsterdam. These people are growing up with freely available weed, they were never making an idiot of themselves. No, you left that to the English to make idiots of themselves.
And it's more responsibility. They put an onus on responsibility over there, I think, and I think that should be done across the board. On treat people like adults. Are you going to get idiots? For sure, you're going to get idiots, but you're going to get idiots anyway.
And if you get, I mean, this is what I would say as well. I would say freedom to do it, but if you screw around, if you are stoned to your nut and you are behind that car and someone dies because you rammed into the mate, there's no
like a ton of bricks. Yeah,
you are in for 25 years.
Yeah,
I don't want to
yeah, and that's fair, man.
I mean, I don't want to hear it. You've been treated like an adult. You're gonna stand up and take it like an adult.
That's fair.
If you knew what was expected of you, and that's the kind of society I think we've lost this idea of agency. Again, you use the word responsibility. Let's just treat people like adults, and often they will end up treating them, acting like adults. And if they don't, well, the rest of society is here to, guide them.
Yeah, yeah. Toby Muse, I could talk to you all day, brother.
It's a pleasure.
Hey, listen, you've been absolutely brilliant. For everyone, if you haven't read Kilo, go and get this book for Christmas. This book is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait for one to read your next book.
Thank you.
Seriously, I'm going to keep an eye out for that, and I'm going to follow you now on. I've already followed you on Instagram, but I'm going to add you on LinkedIn as well, and I'm going to keep an eye out for work that you are releasing. But it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much, my friend.
It's been my pleasure. I hope you'll invite me back soon.
Thank you so much. All right, thanks, Toby. See you later, buddy. Bye-bye.
Take care.